Welcome students. This chapter is totally based on NCERT, The Living World, Chapter 1. So in this video session, we will cover the boards as well as the NEET medical entrances. So let's begin this chapter. This topic, what is living? We need to identify clearly between living and non-living. Why this is important? Because in the course of study, you will find that there are certain organisms that they lie at the edge of or in between the living and non-living. It's very difficult, like the viruses. They behave like a living organism, or they behave like a non-living organism outside the body, so that causes serious problems. So in this part, we have to first identify what are the special properties that is highly specific to the living world, not to the non-living. So lots of terms are there that you can that helps us to identify between living and non-living. The first one is the growth. We all know that growth is all living organisms. It is a property that they all living organisms grow either by increase in cell number or mass. Although this feature basically related to living organisms, but some other non-living structures are there that show the property of growth. So this growth is shown by certain non-living structure like mountains, sand dunes, etc., that grow by some other activities of the earth crust, but surely they cannot be called as living. Hence, growth cannot be considered as defining property of living organism. So, next property is the reproduction. Again, reproduction is a characteristic that is quite common to the living organisms, where they produce new young ones having features that is almost more or less similar to those of the parents. So we will cover the different modes of reproduction in the later chapters, but right now the main category is the sexual and asexual mode of reproduction. But again, coming back to the whether it is a defining property of living or not, we can consider an example. For example, see, uh, although reproduction is highly specific for the living organism, no non-living organism can replicate themselves. But still, there are certain living organisms that cannot reproduce. So you cannot consider them as a non-living, like the infertile couples, mules, etc. They cannot reproduce, and obviously they are living. So again, we can say reproduction is not the defining property of life. Now coming back to another feature, that is the metabolism. Now metabolism is sum total of all the synthesis or catalytic reactions that is taking inside our body. So in an organisms, huge amount of almost millions of biomolecules are being synthesized. That you can say the all organism is a living factory of enormous biomolecules that ultimately react among themselves to express life. So this metabolism is also one of the is a feature that organism exhibit. But still, you can say some of the reactions that is considered as a metabolic reaction can be carried out in the lab. So these reaction that occurs outside the organism in a lab surely cannot be called as a life. So again, metabolic activity cannot be considered as a defining property of life. Now, next property is the cellular organization. So this is solely related with the living beings, and no non-living organism has this organization. So obviously it is clear that cellular organization is the defining property of the living organism. Right now we have got one defining property. Let's see the next one. The next one is the consciousness. A living organism, they react to a given stimuli, or they react to their environment. As the environment changes, their reaction, their response also changes. So this consciousness is found solely in the living world. No non-living organism has this consciousness. So another defining property of life is consciousness. So till now we have got two properties of life, that is the cellular organization and consciousness as a defining property. Let's see some terminology that is that will be used in this chapter or later on this chapter. And to understand this, it is very important, and I will give you some example to understand these terms. The first one is the systematics. So systematic is what is the scientific study of biological diversity and its evolutionary history. that comprises of identification, nomenclature, and classification. It's a quite broad domain field. Now, one of its part, so be careful about the systematics. And next is the taxonomy. So these terms, the student get confused. What is systematic? What is taxonomy? And what is classification? Let's first clear it out. So next is taxonomy. It's nothing but a branch of the systematic. So one of the branch of systematic is known as taxonomy, and what it is devoted to naming, describing, and classifying the organism. So you can define taxonomy as the discipline of identifying and naming organisms into different taxa according to certain rules. It's an important aspect of systematic. It is the business of law of classifying organisms. And that taxonomy is a part of systematic, and how it is achieved, that is the process of classifying the organism into categories is classification. So you can say classification is a process, whereas taxonomy is the branch of systematic. And what is systematic? It is the scientific study of the diversity of organisms. So these three terms are interrelated, and you should be careful about them while defining. So I think that's quite clear regarding the systematics, taxonomy, and classification. So next point is steps of taxonomy. So there are certain steps that usually all the biologists follow while they are performing a study about the diversity of life. And these are basic taxonomy steps that we need to know. The first one is the characterization. Obviously, if you want to classify an organism, you should be able to figure out all the important and contrasting characters of that organism, so that you can easily mark some distinction between different species or between different organism while you are comparing. Next is, after the characterization is already you have figured out the characterization, next is identification. So identification is, now you'll decide to what category or to what group it is belonging, and finally you starts to start the process of classification. After the classification is over, you have defined the rank, we have defined the category, now you are left with nomenclature. And that is an important part, which is important so that all the organism is known by the same name throughout the world. So that's another basic feature. So regarding the steps of taxonomy, we will first start from characterization, identification, classification, nomenclature. So these four steps are very important and very basic to taxonomy. So please remember this. So let's start another topic, that is binomial nomenclature. So basically, you have been encountered this type of name like Mangifera indica or Homo sapiens. So binomial nomenclature, as the name suggests, it consists of two parts. Since bi, so nomial means naming, that nomenclature means naming. So binomial nomenclature means it has two components: generic name and specific epithet. Generally, these two names are either derived from Latin or Latinized form, and it is written in italics while printing, or underlined if handwritten. So these are some of the convention. And one more convention is that when you write the binomial nomenclature, the first word is genus, and the first letter of the genus should be capitalized, whereas the next part is the specific epithet, and it should be written in lowercase or in the small letters. Additionally, the author name should be written in the shorthand form after the specific epithet that may appear after the name. So the name of the authors appears after the specific epithet. Now see the Mangifera. This is the genus part or the generic name, and next comes the indica, that is the specific epithet, and later on the author names comes. So that is the points regarding the binomial nomenclature. Now, regarding this, the code, there are certain code for nomenclature. These are ICBN and ICZN, and you have to remember the full form as well. Sometimes it is asked ICBN and ICJN, that is International Code of Botanical Nomenclature and International Code of Geological Nomenclature. One more term here it is given is biodiversity. As the name suggests, biodiversity means biological diversity in a given area. That is the total number of species. You have to count the species number, not the population. So total number of species in a given area, more is the species, more is the biodiversity. So let's understand these terminologies with the help of an example that will make you quite clear regarding the meaning of these things. Now let's first start. The taxonomic category here, it is given the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So this is like something that, suppose a country is divided into states and it is again divided into some districts and again some localities, then house number, that becomes more specific. So it keeps on refining the location. Similarly, the taxonomic category, what it happens, it has a kingdom at highest level, that is, you can say it can relate it to a country level. Then comes the phylum, it keeps on breaking and becoming more and more specific. Higher, if you go higher, it becomes more and more generalized. And if you move down, that is from kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, it becomes highly specific or highly specialized. Now see, the taxon, suppose a group of organism that is divided at a specific category, that is, you can say the class level, that is a mammalia. It is here, it is given this description of a human. So you can see at the kingdom level, the taxon is Animalia, and that rank is known as kingdom. So this rank is known as the taxonomic category. So kingdom is the taxonomic category, whereas when we talk about the taxon, that is a Animalia. When we talk about the core data, that is a taxon, the category, the taxonomic category to which it belongs is phylum. Similarly, mammalia, that's a taxon, it relates to the taxonomic category class. Similarly, it keep on going, and this taxonomic category, that is the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, collectively form a taxonomic hierarchy. Let's understand with the help of one more example, that is regarding the plant, and that is Allium sativum species, that is a garlic. So again, at the kingdom level, it is Plantae. At the phylum level, it is Angiospermatophyta. At the class level, it is Monocotyledone. Order is Liliales, family Liliaceae, genus Allium, and species Sativa. So regarding the binomial nomenclature, you can say you can add genus and species to form a name like Homo sapiens. So it specifies the species humans. Similarly, the Allium sativa, the genus first comes, then the species. So Allium sativum, it forms a species, that is a garlic. So this is all about taxon, taxonomic category, and taxonomic hierarchy. So now the taxonomic category, taxon, is quite clear to you. Let me define the meaning of taxon. How can you define a taxon? So basically, taxon is a formal grouping of organism at any given level, such as species level, genus level, or phylum level. Similarly, if you see the taxonomic category, the level at which that group is ranked is called category. So category, I've already told you, the kingdom, phylum, these are the categories. And collectively, all the categories, when you arrange it, that should be arranged in the same manner. It should not be like family comes first before genus. It's not. The order is always followed here. And this will form a taxonomic hierarchy. So next, let us start with the taxonomic categories description wise. Let us see first one, what is a species. So species are nothing but the group of interbreeding natural populations of the same species. Obviously, the species means it's a group of population that can interbreed, that can reproduce. That is the basic definition of a species. So it is also the basic unit of classification. So species, basically, if we regard the species, no two different species can reproduce among themselves. That is, if they can reproduce, that obviously going to give rise to new species. So basically, species, they do not interbreed, and that is exist physically on the earth. So this is the taxonomic category that has a physical existence, whereas other is simply a symbolic existence, or it is a semantic existence. So after species, next higher level is the genus. That is, we are moving from a highly specific to highly organized one. Now the genus is more general term. Now obviously, if you consider the organism at genus level, obviously it will include more and more organism compared to a species. So a genus therefore is a group of closely related species. So one species you have found out, another species, and finally it will form a grouping that will make a genus. So a genus is therefore is simply a grouping of closely related species or a group of species that have descended from a common ancestral group. So that common ancestral group is a very important term here to define a genus. That is, you can say all the species that you are considering, it should have a common ancestor. Now coming next to the higher level, higher taxonomic category than genus is the family. So obviously you have a group of species forming a genus. Similarly, group of genus will form a group of family, will form a family. Another one is the group of family will ultimately form the order, and group of order will ultimately form the class, and group of class ultimately form the phylum or division. So it will keep on adding, it will keep on grouping, and you are moving to a more generalized, means you are considering more and more organisms and their properties, their physical characteristics and some other characteristics starts to decrease. And ultimately the highest one, the largest of the taxonomic category in the according to NCERT is kingdom. This is a group of closely related phylum. Later on you will find one more category is there, that is the domain, that is much larger than the kingdom. So when you talking about the kingdom, it is highly generalized. When I say animal kingdom, it includes all the plants and animal, that is not specific. But when I say specifically a special species like Homo sapiens, that is highly specific. So when you move down towards the lower level, that is towards the species, the properties starts more and more common. But when you move from species towards the kingdom, the properties, their characteristics start decreasing and they becomes more generalized. Though this is all about the taxonomic categories. Next is let's start this with some example. Here it is given. You can see the kingdom. It has lots of group. Out of this, we have taken one phylum, that is chordata. That is a purple one. It's a phylum of chordata. Now we have lots of again it has a grouping. It's lots of dark circle. You can see these are the grouping. Now if you take one grouping, it will comes the mammalia. That is a class mammalia. Now again, you take out one of the grouping, it becomes primata, hominidae, homo and homo sapiens, ultimately at different level like class, order, family, genus and species level. One more important point here is to remember the taxonomic hierarchy in the order as it is written or given. So you cannot reshuffle or you cannot move the different categories to different positions. This should be remembered as species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom in the same way that I have already mentioned here. So how can I remember that? That's very easy. You don't need to use any mnemonics. Just relate this term to your school. Obviously, in a school, there is a school. It has lots of classes, and each of the class has a students from different family. So you can remember. Now you have already studied about the binomial nomenclature. That first part is the genus, and the next part is the species, and the species is the smallest unit here. Now starting from the smallest unit, we have a species, then comes a genus. Till now it's very easy. Now this species and genus is a member, and different member will ultimately form a family. Now to form a class of a school like that, you can remember that the family will ultimately different members from family come into an order, and ultimately that order will form the class. So how can I remember it? Like species, genus, then forms the family, and it will form an order, then class. And the last one is a phylum and kingdom. That's very easy to remember: species, genus, family, order, class, phylum and kingdom. So in this way you can remember this hierarchy, and you don't need the mnemonics. Be sure that you don't make any mistakes in naming these during the exams. So this is all about the taxonomic category.